Hello, this is your hillbilly historian coming to you from the hills of East Tennessee here in Appalachia. Let me tell you something, folks. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about a guy by the name of James Forrestal. Yep, James Forrestal. He was our first Secretary of Defense, not Secretary of War. You know, after World War II, we fell into that Orwellian language crap and started renaming everything instead of, they thought Secretary of War sounds too mean and evil, so they changed it to Secretary of Defense. My butt, they're not used for defense, they're used to attack, to invade and conduct warfare in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that. Grenada, Panama. You know, it ain't got nothing to do with defense. It's got everything to do with war. So thank God Trump changed it back to Department of War instead of Department of Defense, and changed the Secretary back to Secretary of War, which Higgs saith is. And but when the liberals, communists in Washington D.C. changed it to Secretary of Defense, Department of Defense, James Forrestal was the first one appointed as Secretary of Defense. And James Forrestal was a very intelligent, brilliant man. He wrote thousands upon thousands of pages of notes. And he was a devout anti-communist. And he saw the amount of communism that we had in this country, in our State Department and Department of Defense and Department of War and everything else. The infiltration that the communists had made into our government during World War II under the Roosevelt presidency. Communists moved in every nick and cranny and corner in our government, and Forrestal saw this. He was also opposed to the Marshall Plan and the plans that turned Eastern Europe over to Russia. Every single country in Eastern Europe said, we told Russia, hey, you can have them. And they also allowed, or made Chiang Kai-shek leave China, turn China over to the Mao communist, and Forrestal was against all that. And he was working on a book to, he resigned from the Department of Defense, or he was fired by Truman because he knew too much about Truman's communist and government and Roosevelt's communist. And so Truman fired him. He left, went to Florida, and was working on a book naming all the names. Had thousands of pages of notes. Well, Truman had the government, Bethesda Hospital there, military-run hospital, D.C., had him call Forrestal in for a physical, and he come in, and he was in good shape. He was being released by his doctor. His brother was coming to pick him up, and all of a sudden, he jumps out of a window, and to his death, fell to his death. Now, they claim it was suicide because they found a cord tied to the radiator in his room, and supposedly had been tied around his neck. He was trying to jump to a hanging. And that, here, Secretary of the Navy, who was Secretary of Defense, lifelong sailor, who couldn't tie a knot? Yeah. Sure. And there weren't any rope burns on his neck either when the autopsy was done. So it wasn't an attempted suicide. In fact, when the Navy investigated his death, the word suicide was never used. So he did not commit suicide. And all his notes ended up in the White House under Truman. And, of course, one of the legacy media was hired to turn it into a book. Chapters would come out in the New York Herald Tribune or whatever it was called. And it would be published piecemeal. But it had been totally edited by the White House and Truman's people to get all the names of all the inbred communists. You know, they named a aircraft carrier after him, the Forrestal, and that's the one John McCain almost sunk. Well, what does this button do? And he fired a missile on deck, waiting to take off. Set all the planes on fire, and they have a video of McCain jumping out of his aircraft and running for safety. He didn't even slow down, didn't even try to stop and rescue any of the guys that were in danger of burning and stuff. Not John McCain. He saved himself. He ran. Yeah, they got that on video. John McCain, I'm surprised they didn't play it when he was running for president against Obama, but he never spoke the truth about Obama. He's one of those rhinos that was part of the communist team there in D.C. But anyway, at the same time Forrestal was doing all this, there was another man by the name of Frank Murphy, who Roosevelt appointed as Attorney General in 1940, after the 1940 election. And Frank Murphy was then, I think in 1943 or 44, was appointed by Roosevelt to the Supreme Court, and the Senate confirmed this nomination. And he was a member of the Supreme Court. He was also familiar with all the communists in Roosevelt's administration, the infiltration of communism. And he tried to make it known, and they hospitalized him, and supposedly he was allowed to go home, that he was okay, and then he all of a sudden died of a heart attack before he left the hospital. Another anti-communist murdered and gotten away with, and that it's just absolutely terrible that these people are so anti-communist, anti-Russian communism, anti-Chinese communism, but yet they all ended up dead. And because of that, their knowledge and everything, they die these mysterious deaths. So they're murdered. James Forrestal, Frank Murphy, people like that, they're gotten away with because they don't want the truth out there. And I'll have another show later. We'll talk about Joe McCarthy, senator from Wisconsin who was a big anti-communist, but Eisenhower didn't help him. Eisenhower had the knowledge and intelligence to give to Joe McCarthy to prove Joe was right about communists in the State Department and in our government, but Eisenhower let lawyers ruin him in a hearing about infiltration of the U.S. Army. And of course, we'll have a show about that later. Joe McCarthy and what a great hero he was, great anti-communist. But just about all these anti-communists back in the late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, they were all either murdered or destroyed to where they had no credibility, like they tried to do to Trump. They tried to do the same thing to Donald Trump. Even tried to assassinate him and everything. But thank God, knock on wood, Trump's still with us. And he's a real man. The greatest administration ever appointed. And hopefully, if Pam Bondi can get off her hind end and get to work, we'll get rid of all these communists in the U.S. government. Get them out of there once and for all. But anyway, this is your hillbilly historian talking about James Forrestal, what a great anti-communist fighter he was, and Frank Murphy, great anti-communist fighter who paid with their lives. So anyway, signing off here on a nice warm day in February 2026 in hills of East Tennessee. Your hillbilly historian sign off here in Appalachia.